Now it's my pleasure to introduce our presenter today, Nimit Mehta. Nimit has been advising, implementing, and coaching B2B pricing for over 15 years with roles at BASF, Boston Scientific, and Deloitte. During this time, he's led successful innovation launches, customer growth strategies, portfolio pricing, and also led a pricing center of excellence to increase pricing maturity across multiple business units. At Bain Company, he is an associate partner and pricing expert in Bain's customer strategy practices based in New York. So with that, Nimit, welcome.
Thanks, Nick. Let's see. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, and you have control now.
Great. And you can see my screen?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Welcome, everyone. Always great to be in company of fellow pricing enthusiasts. I wish we could have done this session in person, so that becomes more lively conversation than me doing monologue for a few minutes. Hopefully next time. Before we start, let me start sending good vibes to you. We have been emerging out of a very difficult year, so I really wish you all doing very well. Let's jump right in. As Nick said, I spent last 15 plus years standing up pricing, marketing, and sales capabilities within very different organizations across different industries, both as a functional leader role as well as in consulting role, helping large clients with their different pricing challenges. So I'm hoping to share my experience, approach, and lessons learned and some tips to optimally price your new launch. And we will focus on B2B space. Retail and CPG has their own nuances, so you can still use some of these tricks here, but you have to augment them. All right, so let me start with the story. A few years ago, I was asked by a global business unit to help with their pricing strategy for the launch. They have developed a pretty breakthrough fuel additive technology for their biggest customer, a trucking OEM, a Truck Co, we call it. This innovation took 3 years of R&D effort, and it was phenomenal. It improved fuel economy, it reduced the maintenance cost, and brought a ton of other material benefit to the Truck Co's customers, which are fleet owners, right? The fleet operators. Now, when I asked for pricing due diligence, there was none. The expectation was to launch this product at 20% price premium over current version of the product. And why 20%? Because that's what customer agreed to pay. Now think about it for a minute. You spent 3 years in lab developing a breakthrough innovation, but spent little to no time in measuring and articulating your value. Not just to your customer, but let alone to yourself, right? And just accept the price that customer willing to pay. Now that's heartbreaking, at least for a pricer. So fast forward the story, we got involved, we started understanding the customer economics for Truck Co and for their customers, the fleet owners. We ran value modeling exercise, trained our sales team in value communication, but fundamentally change the sales conversation. Instead of talking about $2 a liter for fuel additives, we started talking about $1,500 per truck savings that Truck Co and their customers are going to get. And we helped Truck Co sell this type of value communication back to their customers, which they were able to get a ton of value out of it. Bottom line, it was a very successful launch. Customers were happy with the value pricing approach. They were happy because they were getting a ton of value out of it, and they uncovered new ways of selling to their customers. And we will end up launching this product double the original price target. So that begs the question, why do companies spend few years in inventing, but only few hours in pricing? Now, let me acknowledge that there are very strong marketing and pricing organizations where value pricing is considered in detail before even product is conceived and or in early stages of R&D phase gate process. So I will draw from those observations by working with those leaders as well, and we'll drive some contrast, right? And by the way, if you are working for one of those leaders, God bless you and congratulations. And thank you for bringing ton of value to your organization. But a lot of time I have seen that good innovation is launched with very poor pricing strategy. As a result, a lot of money is left on the table or innovation failed to meet their growth target. So I asked, like, what are the major reasons? And there are many, but at macro level, I identify three. Number one, there is a lot of time missing organizational recognition of pricing as a critical profit lever. And look, we have made a progress, rather slow, but we have made a progress. Still, there are a lot of companies and a lot of sectors where lack of focus on pricing as a strategic differentiator exists. So as a result, pricing is becoming more of an accidental discovery and not an intentional capability. Second reason is the lack of organizational muscles for pricing. Look, pricing requires a comprehensive approach. At Bain, we have 16 step framework for pricing, ranging from pricing strategy to price setting, price getting, organizational governance, and tools. Lack of investment and fully understanding your own value and your customer economics, that's one of the reason for the failure. And also you need investment in data, tool, and people. You need to train your people. So that in my opinion, second reason. The third, which is most important, is the discomfort of value pricing. And where does this discomfort come from? It's maybe from not trying this before. It's maybe from trying this but not being fully successful, or genuine reason like organizational lack of readiness, or maybe there is no champion to support you in this value pricing approach, right? Whatever those reasons are. Hopefully, the approach that we are going to share today will help ease some of this discomfort. Let's talk about the flip side. What do leaders do better? Three things. They develop deep understanding of their customer economics. I may argue some of those leaders do better job in understanding their customers' economics than customers themselves. And they also understand how their solution fits into that customer value chain. Second thing they do pretty well is they get their commercial team excited, fully prepared, fully trained for the new solution that they are going to sell. If your commercial team is not excited, nothing is going to work. Yeah. And the third thing is they create very effective communications at three different levels. One, internal. Let's get your own team ready and excited and understand the solution. Second one, at a broader market segment level. And the third one, very tailored specifically for customer that you are having value dialogues with. Yeah. Okay, so before we jump into the approach, why we should do this? Why invest in value pricing your innovation? Is juice worth the squeeze? Is view worth the climb? And my answer is absolutely yes. There are many companies we worked with using this approach or different version of this approaches, and you always see pretty positive results. One of the pharmaceutical input company we work with, they were launching a breakthrough innovation with value pricing approach. They were able to increase the revenue by 50%. We worked with an ag chem company where they were launching a new product and they were able to use this approach to not only gain market share by 14%, but also increase the margin significantly. But is value pricing always about pricing higher? No. Value pricing is about pricing right, making sure that your product is priced according to the value perception that was set in the market. So the third example here, one of the companies we work with, oilfield company, one of their product was launched but not penetrated well. And when we took this approach and tried to understand why, we found that pricing was out of the market. It was much higher than the value perceived by the customers. So as part of that exercise, we right price it and we were able to increase the penetration by 22%. Point here is that value pricing is truly about understanding and then communicating that value and pricing according to the value perception based on the strategy that you have for that launch. Okay, forget about all these numbers. Consultants like us love the numbers, they love their case studies. But in my experience, being in a functional role, the biggest benefit has always been changing the mindset. What I observe is after running this type of initiatives or moving company higher in the value pricing maturity, the conversations start to evolve more towards customer focused instead of internal focus. And that, in my opinion, is priceless. And that it takes time, right? But people start to ask questions more which are customer facing, value centric, about how my customers' economics are impacted. How am I different from the competitors? Let's benchmark this. So in my opinion, is the biggest value. Okay, drum roll, please. So this is our 6 steps approach. And by the way, look, every consultant needs to have a 2x2 and chevron. So here I'm doing my part with the chevrons. And so hopefully there is no surprise here. If you look at the 6-step framework, it's a playbook. If you follow the playbook or some version of that, we have seen that you can build organizational muscles for pricing and help launch your product successfully. First 2 steps are more of a building block steps, right? So very first step is aligning your pricing strategy with your launch strategy and the launch objective. Step number 2 is customer segmentation. And this is different than your traditional segmentation. It's really about segmentation based on the value derived, based on the customer's operation, based on their business model, based on their dynamics in their value chain. Once you have those building blocks done, then step number 3 and 4 are about calculating the value, identifying the value drivers, and then taking some portion of that value in form of price, right? So in step 3, you identify which drivers should I focus on for that given segment that I have identified, and how do I quantify that with reasonable assumptions. And step 4, let's say you come up with some value, what portion of that value should I retain with myself? What portion should be going to the customers? And by the way, it's a very strategic step, right? So we'll talk about that. And fifth step is around, now I have one price point. How should I think about pricing model and discounting structure, price structure? What do I mean by price model? It is about how you get paid. Typically, you get paid by dollar per unit. There are different ways to think about pricing model, which may be helpful in your particular situation: cost sharing, performance sharing, dollar per users, pay for performance. There are a lot of different archetypes for pricing models we'll talk about. And last but not least is, how do I execute this price with my sales team? And that's your sales enablement and value selling piece. And in my opinion, this is the most critical piece. With all the 6 steps, there are also a set of enablers. So for example, tools, and leverage point is a great example, right? So it can be an accelerator and digitize your approach for your sales team to help them with value selling. There are a lot of other tools you can use. Governance and pricing processes. You want to make sure that you have an escalation path for exceptions management, and there is clear decision rights. And sales enablement and training. I can lump that into step number 6, but it is super, super critical that your sales team is ready, trained, and comfortable with value selling. And by the way, financial incentives go there too. Okay, so that is the framework. Now let's take deep dive into most of the steps. The way we'll do it, I will try to put some guidelines on each steps and maybe share an example or two to help make it to life. Okay, the very first step is launch strategy alignment. If you don't know where you're going, all paths will do, right? So this very first step is critical step to answer, how will you define the success of this launch? What is this launch expected to achieve? Is it maximize the margin, gaining the share, creating the portfolio pull through with halo effect, improving customer experience, capacity utilization? What is that? One client we worked with, for example, they had a very specific requirement or the objective to penetrate within one influencer segment with their technology. Now that's an important target to take into account as you are designing the pricing strategy, right? Other company we worked with, their strategy was to minimize the cannibalization of their existing product. So it was a portfolio strategy, and your pricing, launch pricing has to account for that, right? Okay, how do you decide whether your product is right for premium pricing or not? I offer 5 factors. First one is economies of scale. If your target is to improve economies of scale because there is an experience curve or volume curve benefit, then your focus should be more on the share gain, right? And then premium may or may not be the right strategy. Barrier to entry. If the investment for new entrants are pretty high because of the patents or regulatory environment or capital investment, then premium pricing can be a pretty good target there. Pricing transparency. There are industries where pricing transparency is relatively low, and premium pricing should be considered pretty highly there. The fourth one is sector size and concentration. Is your value chain, especially your customer concentration, is pretty high, then they have relatively higher pricing power in the value chain, right? So that's where you should really carefully consider about how much premium you can get out of that situation. And that should be considered across the value chain, not just for the customers. And the fifth one is customer share of material cost. If your solution is a very small portion of overall customers' input cost, maybe there is less scrutiny, right? And premium pricing should be relatively viable. This step is also a good time to evaluate if value pricing should be the right approach or not. For example, if your innovation is incremental or your strategy, competitive strategy, is to be a follower and the commoditization is pretty high, should you invest all this effort in value pricing or just do bare minimum to understand the value differences and then invest in creating the competitive intelligence or investing in developing capacity curves, right? Or people developments or dynamic pricing. There are a lot of ways. So this is the place you think about, is value pricing the right approach for me or not? Okay, so now we are aligned with the launch strategy. Let's move to segmentation, and everyone loves segmentation. So we are not going to spend a lot of time. There will be no new surprises. My only thing I want to clear here is there is usually confusion around, hey, I do have my service level segments, I do have my supply chain segments, I have my go-to-market segment. Would it be useful for value pricing exercise? Maybe, maybe not. Purpose for this segmentation here is to establish value-based cohorts. The things that you need to ask is, does my solution have different economic impact on different customers based on their operation, based on the use case, based on the scale and technology they are using, based on the business model they have, so on and so forth. Let's take an example. Left side here, example from an agrochem company. They were introducing a pretty new fungicide. And when we did customer research, we found out there were 2 segments emerging, and there was a significant material difference between specialty crop and like almonds, for example, and the base crop like corn and apples. And it's not just that the difference was because of the cost of the crop was different, but also the farmer's scale of operation was vastly different. Their application of the product was significantly different. The value that they can derive out of quality improvement that this product was providing was vastly different, right? So all those drive significant economic variation across those segments, and it's worth having those 2 segments separately. Strategy for those segments should be separate. How do you go about doing segmentation for value pricing? I suggest to start with voice about your customer, which is talk to your salespeople, talk to marketing. There is always some basic fact base that you can collect. But there is no substitute for deep customer research. I have found, for example, on the right side, we have an example from a pharma tech company. We did in-depth interviews with prospects, customers, with industry experts, value chain partners, and also different stakeholders within that, right? So people from operation, people from R&D, people from P&L owners, so on and so forth. This is where you get understanding about economics or how those economics really vary by different use cases. So we ended up having two different dimensions for the segmentation. For our purpose, it's not important, but it was super critical to then derive further differences between how do you go about creating offer for integrated biopharma, which can be completely different from someone who is more conceptual biopharma. Okay, so the third step now. Since we have created segmentation, next thing is about identifying the value drivers and then quantifying them with reasonable assumptions. And I'm saying reasonable assumptions. Yeah. So one of the biggest challenge I have seen here is that people get too much bogged down into doing this value calculation right. That's not as important as just doing it. Okay, so let's just first recap. What do we mean by this? I'm sure you're very familiar with this approach, but basically identifying the value drivers requires you to focus on how your solution impact customers' economics. Let's talk about one example from oilfield mining solution here. Features for this product is about what does your solution offer? A superior XYZ technology with concentrated delivery, technical and regulatory services. Okay, great. So what? Why would my customers care about this? Oh, they do care because the superior technology offers the performance, which is better dosing in the customer application to prevent fuel loss and increase first time pass rate, so on and so forth. Yeah. So, okay, that makes sense. I mean, that's a benefit. But so how does that improve customers' economics? So then you get to the point where that drives yield improvement, which increases the revenue. Okay, so now I can calculate the yield improvement based on some reasonable assumptions, which becomes a big part of my value drivers. So hopefully you see the point here. It's really around asking the process and driving down to that value driver where you can truly either talk about increasing the revenue, reducing the cost, reducing the risk, or there are some other inspirational or intangible value drivers. Yeah, but you have to get to that level. Don't stop at benefits. Okay, so to help out with value elements and value drivers, Bain has a pretty strong framework. We call it elements of value for B2B businesses. This framework informs that value elements are more than just economic value. Yeah. So if you look at the bottom of the pyramid, you have the table stakes. I mean, these are all the elements that you have to have in order to be even considered as a solution. But as you start going up, you get into functional elements, which are your basic economics element as well as performance elements, like increasing the revenue, reducing the cost, quality, scalability, helping out with innovation, faster time to market, whatever that is, right? So that's relatively tangible. You can calculate them. As you start going up, you get into ease of doing business elements, which are your operational element. These are your productivity, your access, flexibility, risk reduction, relationship building. And they can be mix of tangible, intangible, but super powerful elements. And as you start going up, you get into more aspirational, inspirational elements like sustainability or aesthetics and design and hassle factors and things like that. So how do I use this framework? Look, commoditization is inevitable with time. What this framework does is it asks the question, where should you create value constantly? Which block out of these 10 blocks and 36 elements within them you should be driving differentiation and fend off commoditization? It requires investment. Every value creation requires investment, but this can be a very powerful strategy tool for you. And for our value pricing innovation exercise, once you have those elements, you can decide and prioritize how do I calculate those elements. Yeah. Okay, so let's go to the, before I leave this step, my only recommendation is do not turn this into a scientific exercise, please. Good enough assumptions are fine. First time when you go to the customer with value model, it will never be perfect. Iterate over it. Okay. All right. The fourth step here. It's about optimal price positioning. So now at the end of step 3, say you did pretty decent value calculation, you identify 4 or 5 drivers, both positives and negative, by the way. So you can have some things which are also adding the cost to the customers, and you should calculate that. So you come up with, let's say hypothetically $100 per unit value for your solution. How much of that $100 should I retain in terms of price? 20, 50? And how do I decide? And this is, as I said earlier, this is a very strategic exercise. So let me help you guide through what are the things you consider as you are going through this, and some of the things we talked about in step 1 here. So I usually use 3 different screens, your product screen, your customer screen, and competitive screen, and ask a bunch of questions. So some of the consideration can be launch strategy. If it's premium, yeah, you try to retain more value for yourself. It's penetration, you give more value out to your customers. Degree of differentiation, if it's an inch up, very incremental innovation, not too much to be left with you, right? And vice versa, if it's a revolutionary or a breakthrough, you can get more value out of it. But let's focus on risk of realization for the value. I was working with a high-tech customer, and in order for their solution to be adopted, their customer had to change their processes, fine-tune and optimize it. Now, not only that's an investment, but also there is a high risk for realizing the value, right? So they cannot take your marketing messages and say, yeah, you told me that this is the value, you are going to get it. There is a high risk. And then in that scenario, you should be more mindful of leaving more value to the customers, or think about alternative pricing models there. Switching hurdle. I mean, everyone knows what switching hurdle is. Let me talk about switching inertia. Just because the hurdle is low for switching does not mean your customer will switch. There is something called switching inertia, where customers are fine with whatever they are using. There is no sense of urgency for them to make any changes. And you should be mindful of that as you are thinking about your pricing strategy, that in this particular customer base, do I have inertia that I need to somehow address with my pricing strategy and my marketing messages. Obviously, customer power in value chain, we talked about it, easy to figure it out, where you are in the value chain and how much potential you have. The thing that I don't see here is competitive dynamics. You are not alone in the marketplace. You are also can be in very disciplined competitive environment or highly undisciplined competitive environment. You may be a follower, you may be a leader. All of those things needs to be thought through, right? So I usually recommend a careful competitive wargaming exercise here to make sure that whatever pricing level you are coming up with, you are comfortable with how your competitors are going to respond and how does it fit into your overall competitive strategy. Hopefully it's making sense. I cannot see you, so I'm hoping that you are still with me. So we are at step number 5 now. So now up to this point, we have identified the drivers by segments and we identified the optimal price positioning. However, we all know that pricing is not a single price point, right? Pricing is variation by region, by channel, by segment. You have your discounting, you have your gross to net variables, you have your rebates. So in these steps, I encourage you to think about all those things. I also encourage you to think about innovative pricing model, which we briefly touched on. And again, let me remind, what is pricing model? Is how you get paid. So what's wrong with getting paid by $1 per unit and just the traditional pricing model? Also nothing. But let me convince you with maybe 2 reasons for why there may be value or a case for considering innovative models. First one is, you might find that your solution brings differentially higher value for one segment than the other. And it has happened for our recent case study there, where one of the customers segment was clearly, because of their operation and the scale, has much higher value. So if you use innovative pricing models like value of cost sharing or performance-based pricing over time, or usage-based pricing, or paying as you go, and you start realizing the value. So there are a lot of options, and a lot of pharma and med device in this space have been a leader in this because they are forced to think about value-based compensation. But that's an important place for you to think about innovative model besides just dollar per unit, and that can be only applicable for 1 or 2 customers, right? Or maybe 1 segment. The second reason is your value is unproven, it's untested. Yeah, so it can create hurdle for the adoption. And if you see this type of hurdles, maybe trying different innovative pricing model can help you mitigate this adoption hurdle. Okay, on this slide, left side, I provide some examples of how different companies in both B2B, B2C world has already tried different models. But my only ask is, this is a whole webinar topic of its own. It requires significant due diligence. It requires you to think through both internal and external capabilities, as well as hurdle for collecting the data that you need to price effectively with different pricing model. Okay, we are leaving the left side, moving to the right side about pricing structure, discounting structure. When you set up a list price, you also have to consider how that should change from region to region, how it should change from direct versus distributors, how it change from different segments. So I strongly recommend provide the guidance based on different slices of your business. Arrive to a target price. Give target price guidance to your salespeople. And you can use a lot of different technologies or techniques to do that. And from target price, also identify what are the intentional discounts they are willing to offer and what should be the policies around them. For example, here, so it's say, for example, penetration. You want to penetrate within 1 segment, you have to offer some sort of incentives for that segment to try your product. And you have to create right fences to make sure that no one else takes advantage of that. If, for example, if you have a volume related economy of scale, you might want to consider volume discount. If you have any quantity related economy of scale, you might consider that. If you have a rebate that you want to offer in return of performance, so on and so forth, right? So basically, you need to think through your pricing structure here before you go to market. That will allow you to be more disciplined in your sales execution for the pricing. Okay, so just be intentional about discount, create right fencing, set up the right policies and processes to make sure the leakages are observed. And if there are more than, if it's violating the policy, it goes to the right level for approval. Very basic. Okay, we made it to the last step. I can argue that in this whole 6-step journey, this is the most important step. And this is often where efforts are ignored or not invested enough. I was recently working with a high-tech company where their sales force was extremely comfortable selling on technical merits. Yeah, they were pretty good technical salespeople. But the moment we start introducing the concept of customer economics, there is significant discomfort. They have not done this before. I can argue in some cases, they don't even have the right relationship to find out what is that economics is, right? So it requires investment in training, investment in building the right materials for them, right value messages, investing in tools to help them out, tools like leverage point. And also it needs patience. These muscles will not be developed over time. It's not a sprint. It will take some time, but you need to be super intentional about it. And again, I can spend the whole webinar on this, but in the interest of time, let me just briefly introduce that value selling process is a closed loop process. It is shared by sales and marketing. So typically what marketing's role would be to create value models. And before that, obviously segmentation and identifying the launch objectives. But they should be creating value models for segment level. They should be developing value proposition for that segment. And then sales take those models and apply their customer knowledge on top of it, right? So they tailor those value proposition for the customers that they are working with, whether it's a key account or the mid-sized customers. And this is an iterative process. When you go out for the first time and have value dialogues, it is all about understanding from customers whether your assumptions are right. For example, if one of your value drivers is we reduce your input cost by 10%, you made certain assumptions that what is their input cost. This is the time to ask them. Yeah. And in worst case, what may happen? They may you can start with conversation like we believe that you spend $10,000 per batch on your raw material. Well, they will either say yes or no, or they might say you are within the ballpark. Much better information to collect than discussing the price, right? So you need a lot of this conversation. You need to feel comfortable with this type. Your salespeople need to feel comfortable. You need to have right relationship, right stakeholder to talk to. You can't ask those questions to procurement, as we all know, right? I mean, they're great, but that's not where the expertise lies. So you need to develop relationship with R&D chemist, or you need to have a relationship with someone who is looking at the entire process, for example, along with someone who is responsible for P&L or even supply chain sometime, right? So that's your value discovery. Then you come back, you do your homework, you update the value proposition, you update your value models, and then you go back and have the dialogues with them around this is how we see your total value for the solution. Let's talk about how much value you are retaining and how you should sell this value to your customers, right? I mean, so again, we are not talking about price. Throughout this, we are just talking about value. Easier than it sounds. I know we have done it at many places. I have seen organizations struggle, but I can tell you that ones that do very well, you can see night and day difference in how the confidence of their sales organization grows over time. And you need to help them in that process. You need to, we have helped them by creating mock-up session for preparing them for customer dialogues. We even give them the set of questions that they need to ask for value discovery with different stakeholders. We build the sales playbook for them, right? As much as you can do to build the confidence and upskilling your sales organization, better those efforts will be paid. Great. We come to the end of our journey. This is your playbook. Hopefully you can apply this to whatever context you have. And by the way, not just for new innovation, you can apply the entire book or part of this playbook to your existing portfolio of differentiated products as well. I will leave you with a positive note. This journey can be extremely rewarding for your organization and for you. I have seen organizations successfully improve their pricing capabilities, create a significant differentiation over competition, and change the mindset and the culture within organization. Look, your company invests significant resources to develop successful innovation. I hope this approach will help you achieve full potential of your launch strategy. Thank you. Nick, back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Nimit. That was great. So we've had a few questions come in during the session, and Just a brief reminder, we will be sending the recording out after the session. So, and there's also still time to answer questions. So just a quick plug for the post-webinar survey. You'll be able to pre-register for next month's webinar and also enter the raffle to win a copy of Dollarizing Differentiation Value. And now just to give a couple more minutes for people to enter their questions, I'd like to introduce Brian Hannon, who's VP of Sales here at Leverage Point. Nimit mentioned how critical value selling is to getting the most out of your value pricing and value management efforts. So Brian's going to show a little bit about how we here at Leverage Point do that in our cloud platform. So Brian, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Nick. And thank you, Nimit. Great presentation. I know at Leverage Point we get caught up and we dig into the details every day, all day long, and it's nice to see, kind of take a step back and see the process from A to Z, and really see all of the types of decisions that customers make along the way. As Nick mentioned, I'm just going to show very briefly a few tools that Leverage Point has that sort of support that decision making. And you'll see here, hopefully you can see a slide. We took Nimit's approach and kind of roughly applied the tools that I'll show you here in a moment. So value maps, value models, and value stories. And I don't think these are hard cutoff points here because they can be used in multiple ways, but I'll walk you through this process here right now. So this is the Leverage Point website. So when our customers log in here, they all have their own account with their own content. I'm logging into a demo area. And what you see across the top are 3 tabs. They actually match those 3 tools that I just mentioned a moment ago. So I'm going to open up a value map to start off the discussion. Many of you might be familiar with what value maps are, but they're a way to look at the market and look at your offering, your product, and compare it to what else is in the market. So as with most of our tools within Leverage Point, we have a process that helps the user create something from scratch. So we see across the top here a few tabs that are numbered. So obviously we start with the first tab and begin to create or to put in information about the existing market as we know it. So this is an offering called BTR, which is a high-end HVAC system. We like to say it's used to keep servers cool in the large data centers. So it's typically a very expensive piece of equipment. And you'll notice we have small numbers here. These are actually in millions to keep the numbers more manageable. So with a value map, what you're doing is going in, you're listing out what the key benefits are to the offerings in that category. And you're going ahead and then scoring where you compare and where the other folks fit. And so what you're left with here is a way to visualize where you are in the market and maybe where your most serious competitor is as well. So we see our system here. Maybe we're just introducing this system. Or actually it looks like we do have some market share. And then our biggest competitor is a company with an offering called NTG Plus. So once this value map is created, you have other tools here that you can start to use. So for example, one that we've recently added is the ability to create scenarios. So you can start to look at how a market might change over time, how certain competitors might improve their performance or maybe introduce new products to do that. And so you can start to do some analysis of points in time, say over across a few years, and what's happening. One of the other tools here that we have is the ability to now look at a single competitor and build a value model. So from here, I can generate a value model, which maybe is comparing our system to our main competitor, which is the NTG Plus that we see here. And so when I click OK, Leverage Point will then begin a value model for me. And that kind of steps into our next piece here. So similar to the value map, the value model also has a methodology that we'll walk through and help us create that. So we're doing some definition in the beginning of what the units are so that we can get the math right. This is a critical step for building a value model correctly the first time. And then we go ahead and we're doing the same type of feature benefit analysis. But here we're going deeper, and we're actually going to go ahead and take the benefits and quantify those into value drivers. And this tends to be the heavy lifting when you're doing a value model. And actually, Leverage Point helps our customers think through some of these and helps them quantify the value. Here we have a single value driver. So you can see here there's some inputs, there's some math, and there's an output in some currency, whether it's dollars or euros or yen, etc. So ultimately, what we're left with is now a value model that's comparing us or our offering directly to the competitive offering. And you see here in green are the quantified value drivers that we've identified. So now with a visualization of a value model, we can start to also look at how we might begin thinking about pricing this offering. So we can step into the pricing modules. We're taking that model now and starting to look at maybe what we're priced at currently today, and then how that might change based on our thoughts. You know, some of our customers use this in sort of a workshop environment. Others will will use it at times when the market starts changing and there's need to do some reanalysis of what's happening. So you see across the bottom here, there are other tools. So now we have ways of sort of comparing, what's happening or basically how to look at different pricing models. And then we have an ROI analysis tool here as well. So then finally, once we've created our value model, in the model itself is the beginnings of our value story. So I always think of the model as the heavy lifting in the math, but you need to be able to tell an effective story because people don't just want to talk about math, they want to hear how it fits into the bigger picture. So we can take this model then and publish it into a value story. And what you see here is a typical value story. Again, we're talking about our HVAC solution. You can think of this as a PowerPoint presentation, but it has those models that we've created embedded inside of it. So as we change the inputs of the story, and Nimit mentioned this, as we have that value conversation with the customer and begin to share with them, well, this is what we see with other customers. They'll potentially start sharing information with us. So they may say, well, that's interesting. Our facility that we're looking at buying this HVAC system is much bigger than the model, baseline data that you have. So our facility is 1.2 million square feet, and we're paying more for energy in this part of the country. And so as they change the inputs to the discussion, then the value story will change. And this is, by the way, this is the win-win time for a salesperson and a customer because they're learning more and the salesperson's learning more at the same time. And ideally, what happens is you begin to jointly agree upon what's happening in this particular scenario. And ultimately, this turns into a reason why the customer should be excited about your solution, and also potentially a reason why they should choose you over the competition. And so if you remember back to our value model, we had a competitor that we were comparing ourselves against. And so maybe we actually do some of that comparison directly for our customer. Sometimes people forget, and especially younger salespeople forget, that the customer needs to do a lot of this analysis if they're going to buy your solution. And if you can help them do it, and you can put something in their hands that does a lot of the heavy lifting for them, A, they'll be appreciative, and B, they're going to tend to want to work with you. So here we have a TCO chart, which actually compares the energy and the downtime, et cetera, for the BTR system versus the NTG. And they're much more expensive to operate, even though they're less expensive upfront. So we do a total analysis over 10 years of the cost, and really it's a heavy pointer to why they should spend more money for our equipment today, because they're going to end up saving a lot of money over time. And so Leverage Point provides charts and graphs to do a lot of this analysis and ultimately to help make decisions. And so we can introduce new charts and graphs to help customers tell stories. We do that all the time. And then ultimately what you're able to do is then download this story now to a PDF or a PowerPoint, which you can then send to the customer. So I think that's what I wanted to cover. And thank you for your time. And again, thanks, Nimit, for the presentation. And I'll pass this back to Nick, or Nick will.
Thank you, Brian. Yeah, that's great. And if anyone is interested in seeing this for themselves, potentially, you know, with some of their own figures or differentiators, don't hesitate to reach out to us. We can schedule a custom demo for you at your own convenience. So, and you'll find that call to action in the survey after the webinar. So, if you're interested, we'll be in touch. So, some questions. Nimit, you ready?
Yes.
All right, we'll start with this one. 6 stages. Which of the 6 do you find clients most often getting stuck, and what is your advice for them?
Good question. I would say the place I find customers or clients or the companies I have worked with found more frustrating is the value drivers and quantification. But also the step where I found them less invested is in value selling. So let's talk about value drivers and quantification. How do you go over the frustration? My advice is, and this is based on some of the battle scars that I have had over the years, just prioritize your value drivers. Not all the value drivers are as important, right? So look for the ones which, before you start quantification, look for the ones which are more material, more important to the value story that you are going to say for the segment that you are working with. Other thing I would say is, be comfortable with good enough. As I said earlier, it's not a scientific exercise. Answer that you will come out with in the first version would need to be iterated over. So when you take this first model to the customers, it will not be perfect. Your assumptions will be all over the place. Still, it is much better to start somewhere and then iterate over time than to spend a lot of time making it perfect from the get-go. The third thing is there is no substitute for building the value knowledge within your organization, right? So think about how you are collecting the customer feedback, how you are taking the feedback and institutionalizing it within your own organization. And this can be coming from sales call logs or customer research or surveys. Even I have found expert interviews that you should do time to time in the industry can bring really good strategic insights that you can build towards value quantification exercise. So that's my advice in terms of how to get over that frustration, Nick.
Great. Here's another good one. When you're working with your client, when you've worked with clients, what sales adoption strategies have you seen successful with regards to value selling? So I think they're focusing on that last section.
Yeah, that's a great question. So the ones who do pretty well, one of the biggest thing with them is they always involve sales influencers upfront. So do not wait till you are done with your step number 5 and then say, okay, let's go to the sales and figure it out how to value sell. That never works. Look, sales is your biggest ally, and they are the one who are going to deliver the story. They need to be extremely comfortable, but not only that, they need to be part of developing this from the step 1. I have stopped the initiatives where I don't get the right sales champion to work with me from the day 1. So I cannot emphasize enough having the right partner from sales from day 1. Other thing is invest in sales capability building, right? I mean, this may require your organization to be upskilled, and you need to think through how do you systematically invest in them in terms of training, mock interviews, supporting them with the right messages, tools, everything that we talked about. The other thing I would say is give them enough proof points. Don't let them go and then have customers ask tough questions and you have nothing to prove your value for. So as a marketing, you have responsibility to give them a very detailed set of proof points for the value that you are telling your customers about. And other thing I would say is increase your access from sales points or salespeople to beyond just the procurement, right? You can only get so much out of talking to one type of stakeholder, so you need to have broader radar there. And the last I would say is incentives. The organization that drives their incentive structure closer to their value selling goals can have better chance of successful value selling implementation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that all sounds right. And we actually have a white paper on this. So if you're interested in our website, it's Drive Sales Team Success Keys to a Sustainable Value Selling Initiative. And I can reach out to you. I can include that in the post-webinar package as well. Nimit, I think we have time for one more. I know we have a lot of questions, and we'll try to get to these after the webinar where possible. But let's try this one. My organization's data maturity is in an early stage. Can I still use this framework?
Yes, absolutely. Do not wait for your data to be perfect. That's like waiting for a flying unicorn. In my experience, the data has to get better with the use case that you are putting in front of it, right? So there is plenty, I guarantee you, there is plenty of good starting point already out there for your organization. I have always found the wisdom of crowds method is pretty useful. When I collect or we collect people from technical services, people from marketing, from supply chain, from R&D labs, from sales, customer service, you realize that there is so much knowledge already out there, but nobody really put them together, right? So start there. Make assumptions based on this wisdom of crowd and come up with version 1.0 of whatever that model is. But in long run, I would say you need to do a few things, right? Identify what data gaps you have, which data is critical for your value pricing exercise, and go about making plan to get it. For example, one of the companies we realized that we did not have a good benchmarking information. Even the actually as a head of marketing role, we realized that we did not have a lot of good benchmarking, and then we made a plan. We made a plan to go in the lab and create the benchmarking against competitors. Go out and do the customer research, right? Collect the economics information. Invest in interviewing market influencer, market experts. So start with what you have, make a plan, and bridge the gap.
That is a great place to leave it, and that's a great message, I think, for everyone here. So thank you, Nimit, for taking the time to join us. And a quick note for everyone before we leave, we have an exciting webinar next month. We're going to be joined again by Jillian Smith, and she'll be sharing a 5-step process for sales teams that are looking to overcome price pressure and overall reduced discounting. So this should be a really informative session, so make sure you pre-register in the exit survey. So that's it from us today. I want to give a big thank you to Nimit for joining us, as well as Brian for sharing how we do it here at Leverage Point. And from all of us here at Leverage Point, have a wonderful rest of your week. Take care.
Take care, everyone.